Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this February HVG event sponsored by Team Kinetic. It's lovely to see you all today. Absolutely delighted to be joined today by Chris Wade from Time for Impact, who is going to talk to you about this really meaty topic today. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to you, Chris, and I'll be here in the background should anyone need any assistance. Thanks, Chris.
Thanks, Rhiannon. Yeah, meaty topic. We've got 50 odd minutes, so we'll do what we can, but hopefully I'll at least whet your appetite for thinking further about the subject, because I actually think that measuring and leveraging impact is a really critical role for volunteer managers, because we often don't get the resources and the funding and the influence that we need, and no one's going to do that for us, and impact is one of the tools that we do have to do that better. So very, very quick, I'm not going to waffle on about me, but Time for Impact, if you've not come across us, we do all things volunteering really, but our mission, the three things that we really focus on is one is, I call it unmasking the impact. So really recognizing that volunteering is more than just a nice thing. It's a strategic value to the societies and the organizations that we work with, and to the volunteers and to our beneficiaries and our customers and so on. And we really should be capturing that and using that to really drive volunteering forward. I like to help organisations increase participation. We all see those graphs of doom across the sector where volunteering numbers are declining, or at least not exactly growing very fast. But actually, I think there's an awful lot of goodwill, and I think a little bit of imagination and creativity, there's ways to really unlock potential and increase recruitment. And after 20 something, 25, 26, 27 years of leadership in volunteering, I do see a lot of things which have probably not changed as much as I would hope they would. And I also see some innovation. So I like to shine a light on innovation where I see it, which we largely do through the podcast, but also help organisations just modernise and rethink volunteering, because the world around us, the way people participate in our organisations is and has changed. So we need to make sure we're changing with it. I do like to keep in touch with people, so we're not really connected. No, please do. There's the QR code that links you through to our LinkedIn page. Please do get in touch. It's nice to be connected and share stories and share ideas. One of the things we do, which is why I'm here today, is provide tools that help people measure and demonstrate the impact of volunteering. I'll come more to that in a moment. And as I mentioned already, we run a podcast. Sorry, Matt, who's on the call, couldn't resist that. If we're going to have a picture of one of our guests on the podcast, what it ought to be Matt Hick, really, who was actually our first guest on the podcast. So if you've not listened to the Time for Impact podcast, no, it's free. Why not? Give it a go. Hopefully you'll enjoy it. And there's lots of food for thought. And it's less about me. It's much more about our guests sharing their stories and their innovations. So we've got a lot of listeners in the UK and across the world now. So please join and let us know what you think. But we're talking about impact today. So I wanted to start with just a bit of a chat in the chat box with you. So what's your experience so far about measuring the impact of your volunteering within your organisations? Perhaps put in a few keywords, a few examples in the chat for us. It's good to know what people are up to. Do you measure impact in your organisations? Okay, so nothing to loads of stuff. How many people are, yeah, so you catching how many people were onboarded, number of volunteers, number of hours. Yeah, monthly impact statements about volunteer hours, activities. So you're keeping your directors and your HR team updated on again, similar things, hours, satisfaction surveys, and retention. It's good. Hours volunteered, number of visitors. Yeah, so it's presumably number of visitors that your volunteers have interacted with. Volunteer stories, Ruth, brilliant. Stories are so powerful. How many active volunteers in the system? How it served operational and strategic needs of the Science Museum Group and links to wider government ambitions. That's A plus, Matt. Volunteer satisfaction surveys, more hours and numbers and satisfaction surveys. Ease of volunteering, sense of community, well-being, skills. Lovely. I like all that. Yeah. National Lottery Heritage Fund, of course. Thank you. So it's driven by your funder. Yeah. We've got to be giving the funders what they want, and important that is, for sure. And as we explain later on, sometimes mapping your impact against both current and future funders is a really useful thing to be doing. So why should we be focusing on measuring the impact of volunteering? I mean, everybody, almost everybody, I put it in brackets there, I speak to values volunteers. Most CEOs, directors, trustees, where they're available, tend to tell me volunteering is a great thing. We couldn't run our organisations without our volunteers. They're central to what we do. They're the heartbeat of our organisation. They're the lifeblood about, you've heard it all before. That's what we hear. And yet what I see in practice is volunteering as a team is frequently underfunded. I see organisations where it's often one person for a relatively large organisation having to manage all things volunteering, doing the admin, doing the operations, doing the strategy, and it all done on a shoestring. Yeah, if we say that volunteers are so important, then surely we should be able to change that narrative around. I don't see enough, in my experience, fundraising, particularly in the charity world, I guess, bids for funders for volunteering. It seems to be kind of there, but it's not central to the bids that go in. When I speak to trustees and directors, and I ask them to describe the strategic value of volunteering. What does volunteering deliver for their organisation? What does it deliver for the society they work with? What does it deliver for their funders, for their community? They often quite struggle to really explain beyond it's if we had to pay somebody to do the same job, it would cost us an awful lot of money. Well, that is kind of strategic, but it's only one dimension of the value of volunteering in my experience. And of course, we all know that volunteering is perceived to be free, and therefore somehow it seems to be amateurish by some people, and it doesn't get the resources, and it seems we don't need the same emphasis on managing volunteers as we do on staff, for instance. And I think actually you will all know that the skill set, the wide skill sets needed to manage a group of volunteers and volunteer activities is pretty formidable. I think personally we should be investing in that an awful lot more. And lastly, the volunteering is often described as a program or a project. It's not described as this central to the strategy of the organisation. It doesn't appear in enough of the strategies that I read for organisations as a central tenet on how things are delivered. We are delivering through volunteers, but we don't somehow think of them as strategic. At least that's my experience. Yeah, if we do start to measure the impact of volunteering, first of all, from a volunteering strategy point of view, it helps us really know where to focus our attention. It tells us what parts of our strategy, which activities that we do or our volunteers do are particularly important and where we need to make sure we get them right. So obviously, if we understand the impact, we will understand where we need to focus our energies. But also, if we're able to demonstrate the impact of our volunteering, it also means that we're much better placed when the next time you're going to organise your strategic plan, your organisation are shaping their new strategy, they're setting their new budgets. You're in a much stronger position to argue that actually volunteering plays a central role in delivering that strategy, in increasing your access to funds, increasing your customer satisfaction, and so on. So by actually having a really clear impact, it gives you the tools you need to leverage that influence with your decision makers. And actually means that instead of volunteering just being an add-on to the plan, you can be the team that goes to the strategy meetings and starts to shape the organisation strategy, because you can make a good case for resourcing being better implemented through volunteering. And of course, we know that when you look at the household surveys and so on around volunteering, one of the things you see an awful lot is that one of the drivers of volunteering is that they can see the impact of what they do. It goes without saying. I mean, it's not the only driver for volunteers, but it is certainly a driver. So the better you are at showing how their activity leads to impact, real life impact for the organisations, for the volunteers themselves, for the community, for the customers, for society, and so on, the better you are about showing how their efforts and their time that they give is worthwhile. And likewise, by demonstrating the impact volunteers, you might increase community engagement, community connectivity, increase donations, repeat custom, and so on. So there's lots of compelling reasons to focus on impact. But the truth is, that's what most volunteer managers look like or feel like, I think, on a regular basis. you are juggling so many spinning plates that it's quite hard to find the time to really focus on measuring the impact, because it's not easy, is it? So you do the simplest things. The same with data. We often collect what we have available rather than what data we actually need in an organization, because we often don't have the time to get away from the administration, to get away from the operations, to think about the more strategic issues about impact. Yet if we do spend some time on impact, and we do spend our time focusing on what is it that makes a real difference in what we do, then we've got a better chance of really honing in our efforts and dropping a few places that aren't so important, perhaps, and focusing on the ones that really, really do matter. So you've said it yourself in the chat, how is volunteering often measured in your organizations? This is what, when I pick up impact reports, this is what I see more often than not. I see counting of number of volunteers that we have, an increase in number of volunteers. So we've gone from 50 to 100 volunteers, perhaps. Might see some stuff around the diversity of volunteers, which is, I suppose, a good indicator that we're perhaps connected to certain communities or not, or our reach is out to individuals who may be underserved by our volunteering or not. We will probably have some measure of the hours given, the shifts given, the number of customers supported, etc., etc. And we might have some kind of equation that multiplies these hours by a living wage or something of that ilk, to give us an idea of, if we were going to pay the staff to do the same thing, how much it would cost, which there's value in all of those things. But I think we can go an awful lot further. And I think a lot of those are actually inputs, not outcomes, and certainly not impacts of volunteering. So we need to think about what real world impact our volunteering is making. And as I always say, we wouldn't normally, I mean, I used to be an HR director as well as a volunteering director. I wouldn't have gone to my board and said, we're really, really successful because we've got a £10 million staff bill. The amount of money you spend on staff is not a good indicator of how successful an organisation is, and neither is the amount of money you spend on volunteers or the number of volunteers that you have. Not least because your volunteers or your staff could, of course, be doing this. Just because you're spending money on them, just because you have volunteers, doesn't tell you what they're doing with their time and the impact they're making through their time. I think before we go a bit further, it's probably worth spending a little bit of time both on language, but also understanding what the different things we could be measuring if we're looking at our volunteering. Forgive me if this seems really simple, but I think it's worth spending a time just recapping, even if you've gone over this before. So a lot of the things that we do record are inputs. The number of volunteers that we have, the staff that are involved, the archives that are looked at, the funding that you receive, they're inputs. They're important. We really do need to know what the inputs are, and inputs do lead, of course, hopefully to impact, but they're not in themselves impact. The activities that we do, so the customer service, the curation of exhibits, the archiving of materials, the selling of scones in the shop, all of those things are activities, processes. Important, they lead to impact, but they're not impacting themselves. And we often capture the outputs, so the number of visitors seen, the customers served, the exhibitions run, etc. Again, important. It's a good indicator of how things are going, but it's not impact in itself. And then we come into the outcomes and the impact. And it's quite hard to define the difference between an outcome and impact quite often, or at least it's quite hard to decide where something is an impact or an outcome, because it's a bit of a elastic kind of definition. But usually the outcomes are the more short-term things. So you've provided some support to some customers. They've had a good experience and they're coming back for more. I would argue that's an outcome. The outcome is the quality of your volunteer experience, interaction with those supporters, those visitors, means that they come back for more. That's great. Good stuff to be measuring. And I think that's wholly better than measuring the number of volunteers that you have. In all honesty, those kind of measures. But we could go further. We could say that those repeat the service that we gave to those customers, which caused them to go back, also means that they talk to their friends and their family in the local community, and it really embeds the museum or the stately home or whatever it is that you're working for into the sort of psyche of the local community. It means that you're really connected to the community. It means that it feels like there's a big connection. That for me would be an impact of your work. A volunteer who's had a good time, it might be an output. A volunteer whose confidence is boosted could be an outcome. A volunteer is using those skills outside their volunteering role to really boost their career opportunities and so on, might be an impact. And I will say data is your amplifier. It's the opportunity. We all know that volunteering is good, right? We all know that we help our volunteers. We all know we play a really important role for our organisation. We all know that our museums or our venues are important to the local community, but we need to prove it. And it's through data, through stories and intelligence that helps us shout louder about the work that we do and prove to people it makes a difference. So we should be looking at what data we have or what data we can gather, what stories are. It doesn't all have to be hard numbers. What stories and case studies and lived experiences there that helps really drive the narrative and the volume to our narrative. What customer feedback, what volunteer feedback is there? Some people mentioned the customer volunteer surveys. It's really useful. What is it before and after? So if we can we tell a story about, before we did this in this particular pilot, this was the situation, but now we've done this, we've got a much bigger impact. So before we had a team on the front desk, few customers were going into a particular part of the museum. Now we've got them, they're going in there and they're understanding what we do. What's the counterfactual? So without volunteering, what would happen in your organization? What would be the situation if we took volunteering away today or tomorrow? Can we pilot things? Can we develop a hypothesis and say, this is what we think? Talk to your chief exec and say, I think we're not really delivering on this part of your strategy. I've got a view that if we try this with volunteers in a small place and a small part of the team or on a Tuesday afternoon, it's going to deliver something really powerful. Let's pilot it. Let's capture that data. And sometimes you can't find the exact cause of the impact. Sometimes volunteering is a contributor towards an impact. There are other people, other members of staff, other teams, other experiences that have an effect on that impact. But it doesn't mean you shouldn't capture some of the proxy measures that lead up to that. We're not always talking about quantity. Sometimes we're talking about the quality of the experience and the sustainability of the experience and so on. So data, I would say, is not an answer to all things in itself. Data and intelligence and stories, they're a springboard into action. They bring credibility to your organization. They allow you to present your case with facts and details that allow people to see why volunteering makes a difference. They provide transparency so your volunteers, your community, and people can see what's working and what isn't. And it gives you an opportunity to use that information to improve your own experiences. Gives you a case for investment, allows you to motivate staff, to motivate volunteers if they understand the power that volunteers deliver. Allows you to recruit new volunteers. You can put impact data on your website or in your recruitment materials on your social media, where it helps attract other people to a successful team. It builds trust with your customers. You can use it to highlight progress over time. And if you can highlight progress over time, you can make the case for further progress as a result of further investment very often. And I also don't be afraid of talking about honesty. There are things that don't work as well as they should in your organizations. No organizations are perfect. No volunteering teams are perfect. But sometimes by being able to say, do you know what? At the moment, we provide a pretty good customer service, but our volunteers are not, I don't know, make it up, but our volunteers aren't given the development opportunities that we think they would really relish, and that would make the volunteer experience better and therefore the customer service experience better. If we had a little bit of investment, we could deliver X, Y, and Z as a result of it. So sometimes it's if you present a perfect story, it's much harder to make a case for future funding. Sometimes you have to show that there's room for improvement as well. So where do we take this in practice? I mean, a good place to start, and I'm going to go into a lot more detail in a minute, but a good place to start is your strategic plan. How many of you read your strategic plans on a regular basis, understand what's in them, have input into them, consider them from a volunteering perspective? Do you get an opportunity to do that? Again, I know you're all busy doing lots of things, but the truth is that's the best place to start. You know, if you identify your strategic plan and identify where there are gaps in that service, where either the organization itself is struggling to meet those plans. And as I said before, you can talk to your director or the CEO and say, do you know what? I think, can I go and explore how volunteering could fill that gap, how volunteering could help to make this part of the strategic plan that you're struggling on a little bit smoother. Just knowing yourself where you contribute to the strategic plan and where you don't, and thinking about, are there parts of your volunteering service that you could be amending or changing because it will make a bigger difference? Or are there things that you're doing which are fantastic but aren't really aligned with the direction of the organization, and do you need to just adjust some of your priorities as a result? So I promised in the write up to this to talk about balanced scorecards a little. I don't know, again, put it in the chat if you like, if you've ever used balanced scorecards or you've got experience of them. I'm a big fan of a balanced scorecard. There are lots of methodologies for measuring the impact or capturing the impact of volunteering, and many of them are very, very good. Some of them are incredibly complicated and take an awful lot of time and money, which often, as we've already illustrated, volunteer managers and heads of volunteering don't always have. Some of them give you very numeric answers, and there's a good place for that, and you can couple those with balanced scorecards. But sometimes knowing that the answer is 42 is not always the most helpful thing. You actually want to know in something a little bit more qualitative, a little bit more wordy about what the impact is. You actually want to be able to identify specific actions lead to specific impact, because we're talking about human beings, right? In most things in volunteering. And the balanced scorecard, I always think, is quite a nice balanced approach in that it's quite simple, it's not incredibly labor intensive, and it really gives you an indication of the impact of your organization in a language that your CEO, your finance director, and others might understand. So balanced scorecards come from the business world. They come from a world where investors were looking at an organization or a team and saying, well, do I want to, if I'm in the Dragon's Den, do I want to put some money behind this particular project? And often they were working off just the financial measures, profit and loss, market share. That's great, but it doesn't give you a balanced view of an organization. It only tells you, it's a bit like an MOT in a car. It only tells you the history of where it's been in terms of its most simplest performance. And investors were saying they wanted a much more balanced view of an organization. Yes, understanding the financials, but also understanding what the customers think of an organization. If a customer thinks an organization's performing really, really bad, then that's not going to do very good for future profit. But also, what are the opportunities for the organizations to grow? Where are the areas in the organization where processes could be improved to go forward? So what a balanced approach does, it allows you to really tie your outcomes and your impact measurements to the strategy of the organization. It means that there's a common thread across the organization, staff, volunteering, these customers all understand what impact should look like and what they're trying to measure. And it gives you a narrative that influences the boards and your CEO and others to invest more effectively in the future. Sorry to interrupt the training session at this point. In the live training session, we went through Time for Impact's proprietary model for measuring the impact of volunteering using a balanced scorecard approach. Because of the commercial sensitivity of that information, unfortunately, that's not going to be available on this YouTube channel. However, if you would like to speak to us at Time for Impact about our model, how we can help you, please do look on our website, www.timeforimpact.co.uk, and there are some more information and links at the very end of this presentation. Thank you. Now, my experience again is that we measure too much in organizations. We measure what we can count rather than what we need very often. But the truth is that this is about getting a balanced scorecard. So for each of those, you come up with 2 or 3 things that you want to measure, which tell a story, which give a narrative that volunteering activity A leads to really fantastic impacts. And then you choose as a team which are the ones which are most impactful for you as an organization, which are the ones which are going to make the biggest impact. And they're the things that you measure. So you measure the things which tell the biggest story, not the things which are closer to hand. Sometimes you'll have that data available. Sometimes you need to find new ways to collect it through case studies, through feedback forms, through focus groups, whatever it might be. I think it's really important to not sit in a darkened room and create these impact stories yourself. You need to do it in collaboratively with your volunteers, with your colleagues, with your director, maybe with some customers, but really start to get the right stakeholders involved. Ask volunteers what impact it has on them. Yes, you'll do some surveys, but involve them in these exercises. And through Time for Impact, we provide in-person workshops so we can go and come and meet with you, but we also provide online versions in English and Arabic if anybody wants it in Arabic. But that takes you through exactly that step with stakeholders, with your volunteers, with your colleagues, to work out those journeys, take you through step by step with a video through the logic models. And you get a discount for HVG membership, of course. And a few of you mentioned surveys, volunteer surveys. So if anybody's interested, we also provide a cross-sector survey. So you not only get your scores, but you can compare them with other organisations involved volunteers. So you can see how you stack up against others. And again, I leave all the details up there, but it's a discount for you as well. But yeah, it's been lovely talking to you. It is a meaty subject. We can only whet the appetite. If anybody wants to talk further, do get in touch. But please, let's see if we can move our organisations beyond capturing number of volunteers and number of volunteers hours to really capturing a difference that volunteers make to the organisations and to people's lives. If you did that in one area, it'd be a massive, massive improvement.